right, buddy. Here we go. We're all recovered. Everybody's ready to move forward.
Let's do it. Let's move forward. It's September 15th, the year 2022. Welcome aboard, everybody. You're listening to the Crushing Iron podcast, episode 617.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, the 617. Before we get into the meat of the cast, I do want to invite all of our listeners on October 1st to the Boca Vista Training Center in Wisconsin. They will be renaming the Aquatic Center the Mike Tarrolly Swim Center at Boca Vista after this last weekend's legendary performance from Mike Tarrolly. They will be unveiling a bronze statue of Mike in his with no swim cap, just his aquasphere goggles and his floaty pants. They will be unveiling that bronze statue October 1st at noon. You can get in there and they'll have a kind of a free breakfast and kind of laid out cafeteria, like a Piccadilly type situation for everybody. Seniors get in 50 and over for free. And then anybody under, it's $99.99. So come join us. It'll be a great day. And I really can't wait for this much deserved award and presentation for you, Mike.
It's such an honor. They've welcomed me in with open arms, and I couldn't be happier to be part of Boca Vista.
Yeah, so you're really changing. Sometimes places like that, even servicing the age range they do, sometimes they need a culture change, and I'm happy you could be that for Boca Vista. And speaking of culture changes, hopefully we can improve your culture or change you for the better. It's your first time tuning in. Welcome. We appreciate you giving us your time. We know you have quite a lot of options in the triathlon podcast universe and just podcasts in general. We know your time is very valuable, so we always do appreciate you tuning in. We cover it all. We'll do race recaps like we just did. We'll do race previews like we have before. But for the most part, Mike and I as coaches, athletes, best friends, we just sit back, relax, have an open, honest discussion about what we're going through, both as human beings, but also coaches and athletes ourselves. We also talk a lot about what our own athletes are going through. Mike and I both work with a wide range of athletes all across the globe, from beginner level athletes looking at their very first 5K or sprint, all the way up through elite level amateurs trying to get back to Kona, and everyone in between and from all over. We work with athletes here in the U.S., but also abroad. So if you're interested, make sure you can check that out. And we'll use the feedback loop we have with them and training peaks, emails, text messages, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, MySpace, you name it. And we'll use the topics and conversations we have with them to drive the discussion of the day. We also frequently utilize our amazing Facebook group. If you want to be a part of that group, you can search, again, in Facebook, Crushing Iron Group. Answer one simple question, and we'll let you right in. Great community, amazing people, and again, a lively bunch. And the door's been swinging wide open here the last few weeks, either via Facebook algorithms or, people getting ready for race season, and listening to some of our race previews and race recaps to get ready for their big day. But it's a great community, a lot of awesome people in there. And again, a wide range, right? You got people who are super experienced all the way up to, podium athletes at Kona and Ironman champions, and all the way down to the rest of us, right? That are just continuing to learn about the sport, and people are trying to figure out well enough to do their first. So everyone's in there. Ask questions, get answers in what can be a very confusing sport. That's it. We don't do sponsors. We don't do ads, but we do have an agenda, and that's to keep you happy and healthy in your endurance sports journey.
I didn't think it was possible, but I can actually say that I think that's a really good Facebook group we have there.
Dude, I know. It's like, I go in there, you and I are not, neither one of us are real big Facebook people, but I go in there periodically to kind of check on the herd. And it's a well-policed bunch. It's a really solid, uplifting, reasonable group. And I think that's like the key. Like, a lot of these groups, it's about, whose fish is bigger, right? I did a 150-mile bike ride with a 40-mile run, and I felt amazing. Finish time, 16:30. It's about, how great they did in training, and you should be doing this, and you shouldn't be doing that, and you weren't trained enough. And, it's really, no, it's a lot of Facebook groups out there are just very symbolic of triathletes in general. They ask questions because they want you to ask them questions they can talk about themselves, and that's generally how it is. But we have an amazing group. The majority of our athletes are in there, so they kind of self-police to make sure things. But there's a certain expectation and culture we have both in our team and in our group that's we're positive and informative, and that's what you need in life. That's what you need in the sport. So yeah, be a part of the group. And if you have questions, ask them, because the longer you wait, the more mistakes you'll make. And then the sport's been going around for a long time. I've been doing it for a long time. You've been doing it for a long time. Some people in there have been doing it even longer. So if you got a resource, use it. Because if you're not, you're just kind of wasting time being in there. So yeah, be a part of the group, and it's a really, really solid bunch in there. A very solid group of people.
Yeah, you said responsible, and I think that's a great word for it. And there's synergy there, and the people are thoughtful. I went into Wisconsin's Facebook group after the race to see, you have to check it out, right? And just see what happened. And there's some really good posts in there, but I would say over half are just kind of like, what are you doing? Just come in, and if you got real questions, and ask them, but think them through a little bit. Don't just sort of take up space. And I think that's what happens with our group, is that a lot of people really put thought into their questions or comments and things like that. And it's just refreshing. Anyway, I'm running for, I didn't tell you this, but I'm running for Boca Vista HOA president.
Dude, with your clout and
Experience.
I hope you do your debate in your Wisconsin sports code, because listen, you got my vote. I don't know if I can mail in voting. It seems to be. Yeah, I mean, you got my vote. I mean, I think, listen, you're in with the legendary status of this last weekend. You got it. And I will say, today we're going to talk a lot about lessons learned from Wisconsin. Obviously, we did a nice little recap, which got honestly probably some of the best feedback we've ever gotten from a podcast, which is just, you sharing your experience for the most part, and a little bit of mine as a spectator and coach. But I will say, I oftentimes kind of get on to our athletes, and then obviously, when you read Facebook groups, a lot of people can be prisoner of the moment, in terms of hardest race ever and hardest this. This is one of the very first races where we're talking to people who have done this race, a ton, even back to I think the last time they had conditions that were this bad was 2005 or 6. And they were like, yeah, it was the worst. It was the worst. It was the worst. And even people watching that weren't participating were like, yeah, dude, I don't know. Just, share your epics, or you should all have Ironman. We also have Ironman varsity jackets where you have your finisher patch on there, and it should be just Iron. You should have 2 patches, I think. I left T2 at Ironman Wisconsin, and then I finished Ironman Wisconsin because I think both took an enormous amount of guts, and obviously, and a lot of this we'll talk about today. Just as I think you and we both have some unique experiences. You as a coach and an athlete that got to participate in the day, and kind of lessons you were able to learn, and kind of thinking back and you're looking back through your training in the day of what helped you make it through the finish line. And obviously as a coach that had a bunch of athletes on the course the day before and the day of, listen, it really wasn't that much of a day for PRs. We had a Ironman course PR at Wisconsin on that day. We had some PRs. We had 4 athletes in the top 10 in their age group, and then in the top 100. We still had a great day. And I honestly, as I'm kind of going through some things and reading back through emails and race recaps from the athletes that we had that did it, and just even going into the race, when you get this late in the season, a lot of athletes they've kind of had to patchwork their training, because anytime you're looking at a race that's, in my opinion, past mid-August, you've been, whether you admit it or not, you've been focusing on your big race for the whole year, right? And so the longer you're training, the more opportunities you have for life to happen, or niggles to pop up, or sickness, or outside stress that causes big breaks in training. And I think we even lightly touched on this after the very tough day that those athletes had in Texas with the extreme wind, is we talked a whole lot about willpower, right? And that there was that I had, I think, 2 athletes that, based on their training, they had no business finishing that race, but they did. And, looking back through things today, I think one of the things that stuck out to me, while I was sitting there at the bus stop, and it was getting, because, it doesn't get dark that early there, but it did, because it was dark all day, and it just seemed very gloomy and out of it. And as you're watching these athletes come on the run, and I even had some bike stories, but on the run specifically, I couldn't help but think to myself, one, I wonder how those track workouts are paying off right now. because because honestly, watching, and I say this to every man, after every Ironman, watching people run, I'm like, and I'm not, I am kind of anti-track workouts for most athletes because, an Ironman's about who slows down the least, not, none of them are going that speed. And not only can I think of the athletes that weren't out there that were out there, like how those track workouts paying off right now is you're kind of like, it's all about strength and willpower. And then the other one is this, and this is something that we've preached for a long, long time. You only got to do it once. Only got to do it once. And, I wouldn't say that we fall into the camp of undertrained, running. We run a lot. We just don't do like the 20 plus milers, the ridiculous 3-hour runs. You got to do it once, right? You have to do it one time. And I couldn't help but think as you see athletes, I mean, I think we even touched on this like maybe a month or two ago in one of our podcasts, was how many people are so burnt out and defeated from training that they burnt their matches, they burnt their biscuits, they had to dig so deep to force themselves out the door for so many 3-hour walk runs and slogs and long bricks and 7.5-hour bike rides that they took all their punches and their body shots in training. And on a day like you guys had on Sunday, you needed to be like not even in the arena before you started, before the swim. You need to be like in your limo on the way, because the amount of body shots, it wasn't a 12-round fight, it was like 20. And I couldn't help but think as you saw athletes drop out after the swim, you saw athletes drop out in the bike, and you saw athletes not make it out of T2 and struggle on the run, how it was. I mean, I think we even said this on Tuesday, that it wasn't a race. It was an event of attrition and a tire, but it was an event of attrition. How much willpower you had and how warm you could stay. And so I couldn't help but think, going back to, something we talk about all the time, is you got to be mentally and emotionally fresh going into race day, and how that's able to pay off, and thinking, I'm only going to do this once, and not scrolling back through your Rolodex of, but man, I've already suffered so much in training. I've already done these, quote unquote, #epic day of training. If you want an epic day, make it race day or the day of. And, I couldn't help but think of that as I saw athletes, running it, or they're, barely jogging, walking the majority of the run course.
Yeah. And you talk about willpower, and it's weird because you bring that up, because we are on the same page a lot. And I'm sure a lot of athletes are like me in the sense that even though I got through that and fought all day, I'm still going, because my run splits were not anywhere near what I would like them to be, but I still second guess a little bit. I wonder if you had more, you know what I mean? Cause it's, there was a couple times when I was running, but the pain and just the overall, I guess, fatigue of the whole thing, how deep can you go? And I'm questioning a little bit. So, especially cause I ended up with 14:03, and I'm thinking to myself, how could I have got that under 14? It would have been easy if I would have, there was a couple sections where I was talking about last time, but I was just hanging out at an aid station here and there or whatever. And then I'd start running again. There were some times in that second loop when I actually kind of felt like I had something clicking, and I think I may have given into it. It's always relative, right? How deep can you go? And can you go deeper, man? It's a really interesting question.
I have to say this though, to kind of counter that, is that when you guys got in the water that day, and again, this is true, like, and a great testament to just Ironman and respecting the distance in general. There is no easy race, none.
Right.
Every time you get out there, they're all hard. Like, a coach that I had in the very beginning, like 15 years ago, I said, I remember I asked him, I said, what's the hardest Ironman you've ever done? He said, the one I'm training for now. Yeah. Because every race cycle, every training cycle, every race, no matter what the temperature is, no matter how great the training is or how terrible the training is, it's all hard. It all has its own sets of challenges, and it's all relative to that specific lead up and that specific day. But I will say this, and again, everyone who did that race or has done a really hard race should know, is that when you go into a race, like, it's different, it's a different animal, right? And I think it's two different, you're always battling like emotional and mental beasts on race day. On, a perfect day, like, looking at the forecast, for Ironman, Maryland, which is like, pretty much like the golden goose, like weather, it looks like, you do have a certain amount of, I think, tension and apprehension for the day. That's like, oh man, like, because I think there comes added pressure, right, with perfect conditions, right? Because now you're thinking, okay, I could PR this. So you're like, oh, now I got to do this right, and then this right, and then you tend to hedge your bet a little bit because you're like, I don't want to blow up, because even if I go at, even if I pace this basically just 80% perfectly, I can still get a PR. So you can still hold yourself back, right? Because you know that given the conditions, given your training, you kind of got it in the bag, right? So you might do an 11:50, but could you have done 11:35?
Correct.
Right. But you had to toast it a little bit early. You might have gone 12:05. Right. So I think, a race like that presents its own challenge than a race like you guys had. You get in the water and everyone already knew this is, 99.9% of the athletes there, they're not PR on the day. Right. Even if it's your first one, you're going to PR, but everyone else is like, I just going to survive. And so you start off with like an immediate, governor of, I need to not just pace myself physically, but honestly, I think the amount of, because talking to athletes like already this week that I've already done it, some of them are already back in the pool, back on the bike, because they didn't have the ability to run as hard and bike as hard, to trash themselves. Like, a huge reason, like, I always say, like, an open marathon leaves people destroyed for like a month, because you run hard the entire time. In Ironman, even a perfect weathered Ironman, you're not racing all out because you don't have it in you, because you're already tired. You've already done 112-mile bike, 2.4-mile swim. What you guys did on this last Sunday, I think most people were so fatigued mentally and emotionally from just trying to stay upright on the bike. Like, I had a bunch of them say like their arms are more sore than their legs, because their arms are so sore from gripping the bike so hard, trying to stay up and holding the brakes, and just like having that basic overall tension for 6-7 hours, that they weren't able to run right the speed they want to. Plus, you're just out there for such a longer period of time. It really was like a zone 1 physical day, but a zone 6 mental and emotional day, because that stuff does take it out of you. And we talk about this all the time in training. You think about, stress is stress. So the mental and emotional stress the athletes were having as they went through the bike ride, trying to stay upright, trying not to, being careful of all the water on the road, being careful of the wind, but also not just tackling that, but also knowing in the back of their mind, if I want to get through this, I got to do this whole shit doing a marathon too. Like, and so I do think it was like and again, like, not to say it wasn't a hard physical thing, because it absolutely is. It's an incredible one. But I think from an emotional and mental, I had more athletes say they went to the darkest place they've ever gone in a race, going at their slowest speed, because of the conditions. And I think that is again, a testament to those who finish, but also that if you're an athlete that trained yourself into the ground in training, and makes yourself go to that dark place, or it's like, PR or ER, or I got to throw it back for this day, or this is an epic all day, up all day. It's like you were in dark places in training. You probably got to your dark place a lot quicker than athletes who have been seeing the light through training versus not. And so again, I think it had to be said, going to your, like, could I have found those other 3 hours? Who knows? Right? Like, you go for you find that gear, and then your body shuts down because of all the external factors, but it's the curse of being a triathlete, right? You finish a race like that, and even use like, I probably could have squeezed another like 3.5 minutes out of there, but then you're like, where exactly was I going to squeeze? Was I going to squeeze 3.5 minutes?
No, you're absolutely right. You brought up the point I was actually going to use as a comparison is the open marathon, and that's why one of the reasons I'm so afraid of open marathons is that feeling you're going to get. And it's difficult because honestly, when I got off the bike out there, that was all I had for the bike. I don't think I could have ridden. I probably could have, but to suck it up for even like a couple more miles would have been very, very challenging at that point. But on the run, I think I could have probably figured out a way to do like whatever, 50K or something like that. Maybe like 5 more miles or something like that. I could have figured it out. And it's interesting because what you said about how, granted, the pace wasn't there, and I do think if I was kind of contemplating this idea, like I did stay warm out there all day, but my legs were still exposed, and that has to have some kind of effect. I mean, I put it in a post on Facebook, but I felt a little creaky, it didn't have I didn't feel like I had my pliability or my runability for whatever reason. And so in that respect, I went as far as I could, I suppose, but I could have gone a little further, maybe. It's my question becomes, I didn't run, and we all know it's documented. I trained a little bit, but I really just turned it up for the last 2.5 months and focused on Ironman, and didn't run all that far, but my run didn't feel all that bad. And I think in a nice day and you're kind of out there flowing free, it would have probably been a decent run. So what you're saying is just absolutely true, that dark place in training. I just was sort of and I think that was the interesting part about it, was that I did have a lot of fun. I was really enjoying it. I was getting some solid workouts in, solid runs and bikes, and felt like for where I started, I was definitely peaking at the right time, and I was looking forward to it. And I think mentally that made a huge difference for me, because I wasn't burned out by any stretch of the imagination. I was really enjoying training going up to it. So it was my sort of theory on things, as I err on the side of caution in training all the time, because like you're saying, it's one day, and that's the day I choose to go to that place.
Exactly right.
I don't choose 4 weeks out to prove that I can do that. Then I prove that I can do it on that day. And historically, that's been my MO. And that is, I think if you don't have that mental reserve and you start hitting that wall, 5 weeks out or something like that, that's when it really becomes tougher. But if you're in that, other than the fact that it was pouring rain and it sucked and it was freezing in the morning and I'm standing in mud and wet grass and the whole 9 yards for like a half hour before the swim, if it's a nice day and you're really looking forward to it, boy, that's a game changer, But if you're burnt out standing there on a nice day, that's a bad sign.
It's such a great point. And I can't help but think that, because I think most people do that to themselves in the run. And we're on record of 617 podcasts now. And when it comes to the long run, I think 90% of people who do Ironman overdo their long run. And I think if you're running over 2.5 hours, I think you're actually doing more harm than good. And, you see so many people doing 2:45s and 3 hours. I just went out for a 3.5 hour, 17-mile run. And we've been doing this for years. And, because I felt it in my own training, and I felt it in my gut. I felt it in, watching other athletes perform. That, it's like, but you got to do the distance together at a time. You can only do it one time. And the goal is to be as fast as you can over a distance, not as slow as you can, and practice being as slow as you are and with your current fitness and destroying yourself over 3.5 hours in training. You just got to do it one time. And then over the last year and a half, because listen, as a coach, you always question, right? And I know I'm preaching the choir here because you're right on the same page, is, you kind of say, well, maybe you should add a little bit more running. Right. Because, we're a swim heavy bunch and we're a bike heavy bunch. We do double bike rides a lot because the goal is, right, get off the bike and be able to run your best. And I'll take a really fit and fast 70.3 athlete getting off the bike fresh to run a marathon long before I take an overtrained, worn down Ironman athlete who's run 3 20-milers. No thanks. And so we bike a lot and we swim a lot. It does two things: allows you to get off the bike and feel fresh mentally and physically enough to run, right? Your best, but also swimming and biking a lot has the least, amount of risk for injury because there's no impact, right? And the goal is to become off the bike as fresh as possible. But then, again, like I was saying, as a coach, you always kind of sometimes find yourself falling into lapses of maybe we should do this. Maybe we should, maybe we should. Yeah. And then I experienced one of our run camps. And so if you've never been to a run camp, it is some of the most challenging terrain you're ever going to run on, right? It's hilly, it's rocky. The elevation, I think, for the 15 to 17 mile loop we do on the quote unquote race day is 3,500 feet, right? Mm-hmm. After you've been running 3 days in a row. And so you're already fatigued. It's not like you're prepping and tapering for a race. And we routinely have athletes hit best distances at camp because of a few things. One, you only got to do it one time, right? Consistency is key. positive mental and emotional space does so much for you you'll never imagine, right? Because a lot of these athletes, we've had people run their first half marathon on a course of 2,000 feet in trail shoes right after 3 days of running. You get athletes doing 17, 18 miles, longest runs they've ever done, and clicking off, and then you look back at the training and you're like, hey, my longest run ever is 10 miles. And you're like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. So what's working, what's not working here? And you look back, and so I'm always reminded of how much running takes out of you. Like when you do it, it's not like you go for a 2-hour, 2.5-hour run, especially in the heat of the summer. Dude, you're destroyed. Whether you admit it or not, your body's destroyed for like 2-3 days, maybe even 4. So you're working out, is suffering. You're not getting fast. You're just doing the distance, and you can bike and swim your way to great run shape. Like 3 specific stories we had from athletes. Like we had an athlete who ran I think a 3:48, 3:50 marathon in Wisconsin, who ran a total of 87 miles between Chattanooga 70.3 and Wisconsin.
Yep.
Yeah, because we were worried he was going to get hurt because he was already battling a few things. I was like, listen, we're just going to bike a shit ton. Or as much as possible. We had, Jake Lealing, who basically didn't run at all for 3 months leading up to race day, and he ended up averaging like an 11-minute pace. You had a guy I know was in the top 10 in his age group, and I know he didn't run longer than 2:15. And it's you put in the work, and then you got to do it one day. That's it. You just have to do it one day. And so if you're, again, a self-coached athlete or going off a training plan, be responsible, and instead of maybe adding an extra 3 or 4 miles to your run to go from 60 to 20, maybe add 35 to 40 minutes onto a couple more rides, right? And be fit, right? Because the goal to me, usually like the magic number is 17 miles. If you can run a pretty solid, strong 17 miles under fatigue, right? And a fast 17, you got 26. Right, with all the consistency on the load you put in if you're a consistent athlete. So stop over distance running. Let me phrase this in a better way. Stop over distance running yourself into the ground.
Yeah.
Because that is what so many people do, and I couldn't help but see that on race day.
One of the things I like to do, and I think one of the challenges too for coaches sometimes, is this ability to kind of get them off the clock a little bit. And at least when I'm training, I've talked about it many times. I'm kind of a chrono guy. Sometimes I'll just get out there and run, for time and not really pay attention. But when I do, even slow runs, even my easy runs, I'm always running hills. It's like, just because it doesn't say hill repeat, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be seeking them out. And for me, it's a strength issue, and I know I'm getting in good shape. Even if, like you said, my long run might be 12 miles just because of the timing, and if you're not built up to it, you really don't want to do it. But I know if I can if I'm running these hills and I'm starting to control my heart rate a little bit more and figuring out how to go slow up a hill but be strong and in form and everything, that's the kind of stuff that I think pays off. I mean, you're in training, and you're not. Training is one of those things where you should almost feel it intrinsically more so than looking at your speed and pace and things of that nature. Like some days it doesn't really tell the story of what's going on. And you talk about swimming and biking, and this time, like I said, I went hard on the swimming, probably harder than I ever have, at least for distance. And that sort of thing, I think that saved my upper body on the the bike. Because I was strong in the water. I really knew I was, because I'd done some 5,000s and I was really pushing it out there for me. And normally I'm kind of like 2,500 to 3,000, and it's one day I'll just swim, But I was a little bit, in my mind, not overtrained, but certainly qualified for that swim this time. So that really helped me. And plus, you can't deny the core strength and the upper body and how that affects your run too. And we had a podcast way back in the day, how swimming helps the run. Yep. And, not only cardio wise, but just muscle wise, and key muscles that don't necessarily get worked in the run, that get worked in swimming. So along with that and cycling. And I think one of the things that what an interesting thing I think about with running, run niggles maybe, is that a lot of people, you hear, I'm going to go try a run today, just see how it feels. And because they're a little bit hurt or something's bugging them. And what I think sometimes we don't realize is that you just, kind of got out of your car and put your shoes on and you're going to go try a run. But running's different after you're biking that far and your body is awake and your legs are wide awake and you got your blood flowing through them and things like that. And I think it can sort of overtake some of these little niggles. You know what I mean? Because I've had several situations where I've limped into Ironman maybe with an Achilles issue or maybe an IT band or whatever. But when you get off the bike for whatever reason, I don't want to say it's cured, but it is certainly suppressed. And running off the bike sometimes, just because of the warm up, and I always talk about, I never do it. I rarely do it. Sometimes I'll walk and, I think none of us probably consistently warm up before running. But you just throw yourself right into it and you look down and you're like, damn, I'm going faster than I normally go for the first mile. And then you wonder why your body's like revolting. So for me, it's like, I just think you build those legs up so strong and you build them up with the core and the swim and things like that. And like you're saying, if you're not running an open marathon, I mean, the Ironman marathon, and this isn't for everybody because a lot of people are super fast runners on the Ironman marathon. But I think for the most part, you just have to be strong enough to keep going. Right?
I think, I love what you said about swimming, obviously. And don't at me on this, people, on the socials. Is a lot of people lost their race on Sunday in the swim, in the easiest part of the race, right? Where, and it wasn't easy, but compared to the bike and the run, it was the easiest part of the day where the conditions were, not magnified just because of the water. And it was actually probably the warmest you were all day. It was the warmest and the calmest, the best conditions you have all day. And it still wasn't easy, but a lot of people lost their day on the swim, on the easiest part of the day, because again, going back to what you said about, and references before, about the studies on arm fatigue and how it affects your leg fatigue and your overall RPE, is you didn't know what you might have needed on that bike, obviously in training. You didn't know the weather's gonna be like it was. You didn't know the winds are gonna be there, the rain was gonna be there. There's gonna be partial flooding and almost 4 inches of rain. During no one thinks that's an act of God. No one thinks they're gonna go through that. So you don't train for it. But most people already unbelievably undertrain the swim and come out gassed. And I'm standing there on the helix watching people come up, and I'm like, what? How did? No, like you totally 100% gassed, right?
Mm-hmm. I've been there.
Listen, go ahead.
No, I've been there.
Yeah, you've been there, and I think it's. I mean, now that you've even spoken it out loud into existence, it's obvious why this was your best swim to date, right? You put in the extra time.
Yeah.
You put in the extra distance, right? And you came out and had, and arguably, one of your best in my opinion, one of your best overall performances, especially against the field and in your age group. And it all starts up front. Like, I get it, guys. I get it's just 1.2. It's the smallest percentage of the race. But to discount and to discredit and not take the first part of the race seriously, that starts the avalanche of energy expenditure, to ignore that is giving away miles and miles per hour and watts and pace on the run. And getting out, think about getting out of the water. Again, the easiest part of the day on the race day, trashed already. You're walking into T1 and you're looking at the temperature and because again, fatigue makes cowards of all of us. It does. I don't remember the quote. I think it's like a boxing quote or something, but it's like, fatigue makes, cowards of all of us, because you don't have the energy and the willpower and the wit to continue because you're already tired. Even if you want to, you can't, right? And that's why you can see, in professional sports, some of the most talented teams, if they're not in shape, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. And I think I heard a quote the other day, or I think I was listening to a podcast on the way home, was fitness is keeping technique under fatigue.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And, you know, I couldn't help but see that and thinking like, oh man, you've already 4 rounds in coming out of the swim, and you're looking at this day. And again, it's not a 12-round boxing match. It was like a 20-rounder. There was like, you know, the back-to-back rounds or back-to-back matches. And you have to, and this is the best time of year to do it. You know, if you're cashing in a late season race and you're just getting finished, you know, you did Alaska or Wisconsin, or you're coming up and you're looking how to plan out your next year, focus on the swim. Get your swim arms in you. It's just one of the biggest things people spend so much time, you know, with their kickboards trying to kick a lot, and their fins. And I'm like, dude, get some upper body strength. Get your arms fit enough to drag your ass 2.4 miles as quickly as possible, and let your feet just dangle. Like, forget you even have them. Upper body, save it for the rest. Like that, it's so underrated, and there's so much like misfocus, because then you get athletes who don't even know how to kick, or kicking their rear ends off, and they're using fins, and they're destroying their legs in the swim. They can't even do it right. They're not going to even use them on race day. And then they fatigue their legs so bad they can't even bike the way they want to. Then they overrun. It's like it's a you know, it's a constant battle. But spend more time on the swim and focus on being stronger up top, because again, like you said, you needed your upper body strength for that bike ride. You needed to have arm fitness, and a lot of people lost that, or at least had it, you know, greatly degraded during the swim portion of that race.
Absolutely. And it's not an aero course, so you can't kind of give yourself a little rest. It's funny how many form is the discussion with swimming. That's all everybody talks about. And it's definitely not easy, especially if you pick up swimming late in life. And I was actually talking to a guy who lives in Beloit, of all places, who was in Kona in 1982 yesterday. Unbelievable. He raced with Scott, and he was like, had the first wooden aero bars and everything like that. But we were just talking about it, and how you think about, you know, people talk about it loosely, run form, and at how swimming helps that is because of your upper body. And honestly, I've had long-standing challenges with my hamstrings on the run. They just get weak, or, you know, overworked, or whatever the case is. But I spent most of my time this time training thinking about run form. And for me, that was, like you're saying, keeping, you know, your upper body, keeping in a good posture. That's all I did on the run the other night or day. It was think about my posture and try to stay up instead of, like, you know, slinking over. And I was really kind of just thinking about my core and my glutes, and just moving the hips, you know, and not just doing the Ironman shuffle, and trying to just keep that going, because it was all I could do to obviously keep moving. But it was a momentum thing. And like I said, I didn't have a great run by any means, but it was fairly consistent, and the idea of momentum was always in my head. And I think what happens is, if your upper body gets tired and you start leaning, you start putting a lot more weight on every stride. All these things come into play. And when you want to run light, that's not a good way to do it. So if you're completely gassed in the upper body, everything starts to droop, and then it becomes this heavy run, right? And that's not what we want. I mean, it's always probably going to get sort of that way, but ideally, and that's just such a crazy thing to think about, why swimming's so important, is because you do want to get out of there, and you want to get off the bike not feeling like we're feeling. But it was difficult to do that because it was such a grinder the other day. But ideally, you want to get to that run where you're kind of feeling pretty decent. And you're right. It's just so, I've always known that, but I just think sometimes doing the work in swimming is difficult for people. And it's one of those things where you just got to build a habit and just get there and really kind of get to a point. I talked about it earlier, where I said, once I get to a point where 3,000 yards seems like a 2,000 or a 1,000 swim, and it doesn't really beat my mind up before I get there, that's when I know things are starting to click. And then sometimes push yourself, go out a ways and see what you got, because there's nothing better for your form than to repeat it longer. You know what I mean? That's That's what I figured out. It was like I kind of started feeling a groove, and then when I get to 3,000 and then you go another 2,000 and you can hold that form, that's when things are coming together. It's repetition.
We often use, we've already used it today, the phrase, it's not about how fast you go, it's about how little you slow down. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that, go back to your swimming is, I think a lot of people underestimate, because listen, like everyone's obsessed with speed, right? It makes you feel good in the moment, right? I want to drop speed. I want to do some speed work. I want to do some intervals. Makes you feel fast, right? And in swimming, and we have the hub and I still work with athletes, and you tell them like, hey, listen, if you're doing the Ironman distance, let's say you're averaging 140s right now for 2,000. And then you can start averaging, but your RP on the scale is like, 7 to 8 when you race. Well, now let's say you can go a full 2.4 and you can go 140s, but your RP is a 4.
Right.
Giant fitness gain. Giant. It might not directly show up on the swim, but it'll show up in spades on the bike and the run. And that's just something that, because I think what people don't realize is it's not just your pace, right, that begins to suffer. And you see this again, like you said, on running. When you see people start falling apart in the marathon, falling apart is the word to use, because your pace goes, your fitness and your form combined allows your best pace, right? That's when people say like, I'm running in a flow, or I've got a good groove, or it felt effortless, right? It's all clicking together. It's your perfect pace. As your pace slows, you become more fatigued. You're actually having to put out more effort to run slower.
Yeah.
More effort to run slower. And same thing goes for swimming. Same thing goes for, you start to fight your bike. You're not being one with it. Like, and again, another don't at me is 95% of people who race Ironman have no business doing anything other than tempo and hills. No speed work, no intervals, tempo and hills. Get stronger to run the whole thing, and then worry about how fast you can do it. Right. But most people, you get so lost in the temptation of, I want to go fast. Makes me feel good in the moment. Yeah, you say that, but what you really mean is, I really don't want to I really want to make a different choice, right? Because training is all about choices. I made this comment yesterday to an athlete that I think is true for a lot of people, and either all their training combined or just, specific swimming, cycling, and run training is, I said, when you toe the line to a race, you're more intimidated by the work you didn't do than you are the course in front of you. Mm. And that is true for a lot of people. Is you in training, it's very easy for you to fool yourself into convincing yourself you've done enough. I'm doing enough, right? We're our biggest cheerleader, right? Denial is a powerful drug. I did enough. I've swam enough, right? It's just, I got a wetsuit. It's fine. It's fine. It's like a wetsuit. It's going to be easy. It's a short price. It's 2.4. And then halfway through, you're in a scrum with, 2,000 people making a second loop, on traffic on the the LA freeways. And you're like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. And I still got, 138 miles left to go. Right. It's easy in training to fool yourself. But I don't need the bike ride. I got it. I don't need to, I can take the flat routes, right? The run course is mostly flat. Like, it's fine. I don't need to take the hilly route because my speed will be slower and I won't get as many likes on Strava and I won't PR as much, but you'll be stronger. It's all about choices, right? Everything you do, all your training, swimming, cycling, running, get ready for race day, it's about all these small choices, right? And oftentimes our ego gets in the way because we want a momentary win, or we want something, because listen, easier usually means faster, right? Or better, right? We take an easier route, it's going to be a faster pace. We take a flatter bike ride and we do it with the group and we drive, it's going to be a faster miles per hour. But you don't do that shit on race day, right? And they're using paddles and fins to swim 4,000 straight and pushing off the walls like a freaking NASA, spaceship. And then you wonder why you're, 2 minutes slower per 100 when you get in the water. It's all about choices, right? And you got to be honest with yourself in training. Because again, like I told this individual yesterday, many athletes toe the line more intimidated by the training they didn't do than the course in front of them. And that is not the way you want to go and do a race, right? And so it's very, you see a lot of different training plans and books people read, and you see people just driving themselves into the ground. And I wonder, like, how are you going to get to race day, like in one shape or in one piece? And that goes back to, and going back to choices and decision making. And we haven't talked too much about the bike, but the clothing, the lack of clothing choices people made were astonishing to me. And again, like, if a lot of people, it's their first time doing it, they have no idea. We've been talking about plastic bags underneath your kit for what, 5 years, right? And now it's like, what's a plastic bag trick? It saved me on race day. On a race like that, like, remember, it's no longer about watts per kilogram. It's no longer about how aero you are. It's about staying fucking warm enough to get off the bike and actually run. If not, then you can warm up somewhere else in like T2 with like a heating tent. You got to just, again, going back to small choices, right? You said you dressed perfect. I took another athlete to multiple athletes. Yeah, I never really got cold, right? On race day, I dressed perfectly. Like we were sitting there in the bus stop, and we would look at people and we'd think, oh, dude, perfect clothing choices. Right? That was like the comments you were making. It wasn't like how fast people were running or how great people looked off the bike. It was, oh, dude, they nailed it. Right? People got Columbia windbreakers on and hats. Then you see somebody freezing to death going down their bike ride with no gloves on, no socks, no arm warmers, and a helmet. And you're like, see you in 30. Bye. Right? Because it's about decisions, right? And in those decisions, it's harder to make decisions under stress. Right? It's harder. Mm-hmm. It's hardest to make decisions under stress. And that's, again, something else I couldn't help but think about on race day was, I wonder how many of these people spent 95% of their bike riding on Zwift and inside.
Yeah.
With little to no experience outside, even like, and I get, I totally get, I ride inside a lot too, but I also get outside. You got to get outside for bike handling. You're at least putting yourself in a hard situation. Like, there was nothing virtual about that bike ride. There was nothing easy about that bike ride.
It's true.
Your quote unquote pain cave, like a freaking all-inclusive sauna bar in Jamaica, like at some sandals resort, compared to the bike ride you had today. So there's just, again, making good decisions is always going to be harder under stress. And that bike ride was nothing but stress. And people tend to not make good decisions in that bike ride, and how you chose to dress and how you chose to pace it and how you chose to survive all came down to choices. And it's just, again, that just adds an additional layer to how freaking hard it is to nail an Ironman, even on a perfect day.
Yeah. What's that? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I still love that. I think that fits perfectly. And this could be my don't at me moment, but
bring it.
Nutrition. I've always said, I think if nutrition becomes a crutch, I think a lot of times for people, it's important. Don't get me wrong. It's the fourth discipline, whatever. I think the fourth discipline's mental toughness, and it proved the other day because, frankly, my nutrition plan went to shit and it's something I thought I had under control. Like, for example, I was saying I went with Cliff Bars, and then I realized halfway through the deal that I had Cliff Bars in a Ziploc bag in my pocket that I couldn't get to. And when I got to them, I couldn't get the bag open and the whole 9 yards. I had, thanks to Emily, had a good idea, unbag the open the Cliff Bars and put them in a Ziploc bag. And then when I got to special needs, I stopped. I had some bottles there and I refilled, and I had the guy, I couldn't even get, I had the guy put them in my bento box, and they were unwrapped. I know probably people would think that's gross, but that's just how I roll. But that became, and I had my bento box loaded with Fig Newtons on the first, and so I was just eating them out of there. They're getting soggy, the whole thing, and anyway, it fell apart. But I was trying to eat bananas when I could grab them, and just trying to. It wasn't like on a clock, my Garmin wasn't going off, and I wasn't, easily reaching in my bento box for a, block gel or something like that. It was tough. And if you're not ready for that and you start thinking that's the reason, that's going to get your head all jacked up. So right. I was just trying to get things in when I could, and I was trying to drink a lot, and it's not fun to drink when it's cold and rainy, and it's hard to get fluids in and all that sort of stuff. So it was just all a matter of that. And frankly, it's just interesting because in that day, I wouldn't even say I fueled that much on the run. I was just kind of drinking broth, and here and there I'd have a Coke. and pretzel or something like that. But you gotta, it's almost like you gotta force that stuff in, and your plan is just going to go to shit. And you just got to figure something out. And I do think that, especially on days like that, you just, you can get through it. You know what I mean? And like I love what you said about zone 1 physically and zone 6 mentally, because that's what happens. And when you're in zone 1, it's, nutrition's important, but it's more upstairs. I just really believe that. I don't think I had anywhere near what I thought I should do on the bike, but you got through it, and you just, to me, that's form and finding the right gear and not overdoing it and just staying in your pocket. You know how it goes. You go out sometimes. I'm sure people go out all the time and run for an hour and a half and don't take any nutrition, just a little water here and there. So, I mean, it's in your body, I guess is what I'm saying. And we can't always use nutrition. I didn't have a good nutrition plan out there as the crutch. I mean, it's sort of, I think the body has powers to get through that sometimes.
I think there's a lot to be said for both, right? Having a plan and being able to stick to it, then also being able to go to plan B. Yeah,
right? Plan C.
Or plan D. And then usually plan E. Like, let's be honest, if you're racing an Ironman, you almost rarely ever get to use plan A. Right? It's like sometimes at the swim, you're like, all right, time for plan B. And you're like, watching Formula One a lot, like you hear the radio guys, like after the second lap, like, all right, we're going with plan C. And you're like, what? How in the second lap do they already go from plan A to plan B, already to plan C? It's almost never going to go perfectly. But you also have to be able to make up your plan as you go if things go to shit. Right. And so many people are, again, like we talk about, perfect paths and training has to be perfectly laid out, or everything has to be perfect, or the whole training day is going to go to crap. And training isn't like that. And life isn't like that. Racing isn't like that. And you got to adapt. You got to be able to just kind of figure it out on the way and listen to your body, what it needs, what it has too much of, and then go from there. And I agree. I mean, on a day like that, it's like, well, I thought I was going to be needing this much fluid and this much fuel because, based on my, game plan and my spreadsheet and calculation, I was going to be going, 145 beats and physically, and your 145 beats might be because you're doing 120 beats of leg work, and the other 25 beats is in your mind, right? And you're like, freaking out and you're stressed out, and you're also out there for another hour. Yeah. Right? Everyone was out there probably, I would have to imagine, 30 minutes longer than normal. And the slower you got, the longer you were out there. Right. So like a top end of the pointy end of the age group field, you're probably out there, maybe 20 to 25 minutes longer. And then the more you get to like the 6.5 to 7 hour mark, you're probably out there an hour longer. That is so much time to be out there on the bike, right? Not having the right plan, or not knowing what to stop with, or not knowing what the aid stations are going to have, and also to, that's an additional hour into the marathon, right? That you're going to be a little more tired. So yeah, I agree. Like there's just, and again, like this is to kind of sum it all up. Like that's why this sport is so great, but also so frustrating and so hard, because you never know. You never do. But that's why you have to try and plan and prepare for everything. And then when you don't get any of it, figure it out. Right. And that's honestly, that's like one of the pieces of coaching the last few years that I've, really noticed is the lack thereof, or the decreased ability for athletes to critically think has increased tenfold, because everything spits out numbers, everything spits out answers, everything's predictable. My watch says this, my watch says I was productive, my watch says I'm detraining, my HRV is this, my dentist is that. None of that shit mattered on Sunday. Zero. Right? Because it was from the chin up. Right? And you had to critically think, you had to troubleshoot, you had to triage yourself. I mean, like, it was next level. And so many people, like, because the more and more we get obsessed with gadgets and technology, and I can't wait to hear the ranting from the technology crowd. So you're so anti-technology. No, I'm not. It's useful. But you are the greatest supercomputer on the planet. You are. Your brain, your body, it's capable of incredible things. And every single athlete that finished that race saw that. Every athlete that towed the line, that got out there and made it as far as it could, they saw that the human body is capable of incredible things. If you're the driver, your wristwatch put together in 9,500 different pieces from another country by a random person or 19 different strangers, tells you how you feel, tells you how you're doing, tells you how it's going. Like it's just, you can't predict how your day is going to go, but you can manage it in the moment. Right? Like an athlete who came in like on a 4-day, did the 70.3, came in on like a 4-day super stressful thing from Vegas, thought he was super sick, came into town the night before the race, got checked in, got here and had his best bike split ever. And it had an incredible day. If he was running his numbers and checking his boxes and using his data, he'd be like, well, I probably shouldn't do this. I probably should rein things back in the day. You just go with your gut, go with what you feel. Yes, there's a huge place for heart rate and power, but honestly, most of the people that you had racing like that, I don't want power today. I don't want power. I just want to go with feel, right? I just want to go. Had a girl who ended up with the 8th fastest Adriatic marathon. She said, I'm not even taking my watch with me on the bike. I'm not even taking a watch. I'm not even taking power. I'm not doing nothing. I'm just going to go ride and stay upright. And I was like, sounds like a plan, right? But think of like the level of anxiety that would cause another athlete who feels like they have to have a number to be able to execute the day. You know, it's again like going to the off season for a lot of you, going into Q4, starting in the next year, looking at brace plans, triage and double check and cross check everything. From the top down, not just swim, bike, and run. What do I need to improve on? A lot of times it's not even one of those three, right? It's decision making, it's consistency, right? You might be, you might not be swimming enough. You might not be, might be running too much, right? That's never anyone's answer. I think I need to run less. But a lot of you in your long runs leading up to these races need to run less and focus more on different things. So triage it all, decision making, staying present, putting yourself in challenging situations. How am I adaptable, right? Or am I a robot? Like there was no room for robots unless you could just, unless you could black out and not use your mind and feelings on race day. That was like the only place no feelings had on race day. There's a lot going into it. There's a lot to, but that always, like I said, that's why the sport is so addicting, is it always leaves a lot to improve on.
Yeah. And frankly, I'm thinking about getting back at it today, getting to the pool. I got a good run going with the swimming, and I think it's time. I
think it's time. This is who are you? You're never, I know like you got like the aquatic center thing coming up, but you never get
I got to go see the progress on the statue. but no, seriously, I just think it's, when you come through a race like that, and I actually feel pretty decent, and it's one of those things where I found that swimming. I actually started liking the trainer again, and I just think it always starts now, everything. And next year starts now. And it's kind of encouraging to think, okay, well, not my best race ever, tough race, all that kind of stuff, but got through it. And man, the sky's the limit sometimes if you can keep the groove going, or if you start early and just don't put the pressure on yourself, but get back in there and just really find an enjoyment for it without that pressure. And you're going to be tenfold ahead of everything next spring.
It's a continuum.
Yeah.
Getting better never stops, right? You need to take breaks. You need to detrain some in order to get better, but it never stops. First and foremost, if you did Wisconsin, whether you finished or not, and you're thinking about Wisconsin, come see us next year. It's one of our team races. We'll be back for the 70.3 and the full. They're both one of our team races next year. Don't let the rain scare you away. It was a one-off. Madison, especially if it's your first time in Madison, disregard Sunday, right? Take Monday or take Saturday's racing editions and just copy and paste it over to Sunday, because that's what usually happens. It was an anomaly, unbelievable city, unbelievable race. Go test yourself, right? Go test yourself on a fair course. In an amazing city. right? And so come see that. And then I think we may have some news in the next few weeks about some exciting stuff we might do for that race next year. But go out there. Don't be afraid of it. Some people, I think that's probably going to be bad news for the Wisconsin race. Totally disagree. Like $10 says it sells out quicker than it did this year. $10 says it sells out quicker.
Sell out, air quotes.
Do what now?
Sell out in air quotes.
In big air quotes. Yeah.
Let's go to $3,000 next year. Come on, let's get it going. 3,000 people.
Let's do it. But yeah, and as always, we love you guys. We appreciate you. I know Mike does all the great feedback and comments and stuff on Facebook and emails and text messages. We always appreciate it. It keeps us going, keeps us driving towards our 1,000th podcast in the distant future. But it's great to know that you guys are out there listening, and it's helpful, right? That's why we do it in the first place. We do it to help each other, but we also do it to, hopefully help you guys out. We're just like you. We're no different. We're just in different spaces and different ages and different speeds, but it's all the same. As always, go to our website, c26triathlon.com. It's our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. You're looking for coaching for the remainder of the year or next year. You're lost, you don't know what to do, you're frustrated and stressed out. Look it up. Check out the coach that's right for you. And if you're wondering the wardrobe choices that Mike used to stay warm, cozy, and comfy on his bike ride for Wisconsin, go to the Facebook group, Crushing Iron Group. I think he just posted a nice little rundown of your wardrobe choices that were super helpful. Again, something that most people wouldn't think about having to prepare for, but it's always good to have in your Rolodex of strategy for race days. I know Mike's available, crushingiron@gmail.com. If you need anything from me specifically, c26coach@gmail.com.
All right, buddy.
All right, dude. See you Tuesday.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.